If you're fascinated by the darker sides of humanity, join us every week on our podcast, Serial Killers, where we go deep into notorious true crime cases. With significant research and careful analysis, we examine the psyche of a killer, their motives and targets, and law enforcement's pursuit to stop their spree. Follow Serial Killers wherever you get your podcasts and get new episodes every Monday.
You're listening to
DNA ID,
brought to you by AbJack Entertainment. Be sure to check out some of the other great true crime podcasts from this network, including The Murder in My Family, Missing Persons, Scene of the Crime,
Zodiac Speaking,
Beyond Bizarre True Crime,
Citizen Detective, and
Campus Killings.
All of these podcasts are available for you to binge on right now, wherever you listen to podcasts. Subscribe where you're listening to this podcast so you don't miss an episode.
On the day after Christmas, 1982, some deer hunters were out enjoying their holiday break hiking through the woods in search of prey. This was west of Jacksonburg Road, north of Jacksonburg in west central Wayne County, Indiana. Highway I-70 was just 2 miles to the south, and the Indiana-Ohio line was 15 miles to the east. The hunters were walking along Martindale Creek when they walked up on a clothed human skeleton in the fork at the base of a fallen tree. Authorities summoned to the scene observed that the skeleton appeared to be that of a woman, based on her clothing and accessories. She was wearing the tattered, weather-beaten remains of a blue nylon jacket, a long-sleeved button-front blouse with a scalloped collar and breast pocket, size 12, gray pants, size 8, that had a stretch panel at the abdomen, knee-high blue or gray socks, a white bra, and pink underwear adorned with butterflies and the word "gotcha" on the front. High-heeled wooden sandals or clogs with a leather strap and buckles, approximately size 8, still clung to her feet bones. On her hand, she wore a gold ring set with an opal and 2 diamonds. The remnants of her hair were brown. The Jane Doe had no identification on her, so no one knew who she was. But forensic analysis, such as it was in 1982, of the skeleton yielded some information. She was white, between 5'3" and 5'7" tall. She was estimated to be in the range of 18 to 22 years old, and she'd been dead for about 8 months. But they didn't know what had killed her. It was evident that the woman had suffered some kind of trauma and hadn't just expired there on the ground, but the actual cause of death remained a mystery. Wayne County authorities released just that Jane Doe had met a violent end, and the case was being investigated as a homicide. Dr. John Wambo, the Wayne County coroner at the time, told the Associated Press in 1983, quote, "There are fractures and areas of the skeleton that are indicative of violence," end quote. He gave no further information, but the implication was that Jane Doe had been a victim of abuse. Efforts were made to identify Jane Doe through dental records. She had distinct dental features and significant dental work. She had a stainless steel or chrome crown on the upper left molar, and she had a substantial overbite, with her upper incisors protruding 10 millimeters. But no missing persons reports aligned with these features, and Jane Doe remained unidentified. A lot of work was done to try to track down the origins of the unique ring Jane Doe was wearing, but this led nowhere. Federal Aviation Administration employee Betty Gatliff, who was an artist focusing on facial reconstruction, used a model of Jane Doe's skull to create a lifelike image. She molded clay onto the plastic model of the skull, estimating skin thickness and underlying structures based on the skull features. Photos of the image were published in the papers in February 1983. According to the Associated Press article, this was only the second facial reconstruction completed in an Indiana case, and it cost about $600, a lot of money at the time. The article also reported that the Indiana State Police had questioned about 20 people, including one hitchhiker, in the course of the investigation, but their efforts had failed to identify Jane Doe. The focus of the investigation was nearby I-70. They believed that Jane Doe was likely a passenger in a vehicle passing through on the interstate. But in the early 1980s, there was no way to determine who had been in the area, and they couldn't locate any helpful witnesses. Jane Doe's case went cold. Jane Doe's remains were kept, though. They were stored at the University of Indianapolis's Forensic Anthropology Department. In the early 2000s, the Indiana State Police received a grant to reopen cold cases, and they contacted the Wayne County coroner to see what cases they had on their books. This inquiry from the ISP alerted then Wayne County Coroner Kevin Fouché to the case, and for the next several years, he attempted to make some headway, analyzing Jane Doe's clothing and conducting testing. A NamUs entry for Wayne County Jane Doe was created on February 13, 2009. She was listed as UP4842. Her STR and mitochondrial DNA profiles were entered into CODIS's Unidentified Human Remains database and checked against the DNA of missing persons over the years. Eventually, by 2023, 8 other missing women were ruled out as being Jane Doe. One thing that was done under Fouché's tenure as coroner was that Jane Doe's cause of death was finally determined. Using modern CT technology, which stands for computed tomography, the investigators did a skeletal reconstruction and observed that there was damage to Jane Doe's upper spinal area consistent with a gunshot. Her cause of death was revised to reflect that she died from a gunshot wound to the base of her skull that impacted her spine. In 2021, the Wayne County Coroner's Office continued its attempts to identify Jane Doe. They began the process of attempting to obtain DNA usable for a genealogical analysis. It took 2 tries, but a SNP profile was finally obtained through extraction of DNA from the bones and whole genome sequencing by Hudson Alpha Discovery and Estrella Forensics. Then the Wayne County Coroner's Office collaborated with the DNA Doe Project, the nonprofit organization that harnesses the skills of volunteer genealogists to identify Jane and John Does, and uses donated funds to pay for all the processes. The DDP team uploaded the SNP profile to GEDmatch and found 2 very promising matches in the database: 416 centimorgans, a possible first cousin once removed, and 255 centimorgans, a possible second cousin. The genealogists quickly had an answer. One daughter among a family of 9 siblings had no proof of life since the early 1980s. The missing woman had a daughter named Misty who was living with her family in Michigan. The Wayne County Coroner's Office contacted her. She was eating lunch when she received the message that her mother had possibly been found in Indiana in 1982. At first, Misty didn't believe what she was hearing. So the Wayne County Coroner Kevin Fouché and Deputy Coroner Lauren Ogden went to Michigan and met with Misty. They obtained a buccal swab from her and returned with it to Wayne County, where they submitted the swab to the crime lab for direct comparison to Jane Doe's STR DNA sample. Testing results showed shared DNA consistent with a parent-child relationship. So who was Wayne County Jane Doe? She was Connie Lorraine Christensen of Oregon, Wisconsin. She was born on April 16, 1962, in B-Town, Grant County, Wisconsin, to parents Neil Wright Christensen Jr. and Winifred Black Christensen. She was one of 9 siblings. Only her 2 sisters, Diane and Shelley, have spoken publicly about this case, so I won't name her 6 brothers. Connie was only 20 years old when she was killed. Connie was described by her large family as fun and free-spirited, and when she was older, someone who worked temporary jobs like carnivals to get by. She had left home at times, but always returned home to her family after some adventure or another. Connie married a man named Jeffrey H. in Dane, Wisconsin, on May 17, 1980, when she was just 18. In March of 1981, their daughter Misty was born, the one who gave DNA to identify her mother. The couple lived with Jeff's parents on Fiedler Lane in Madison, Wisconsin, but the young couple struggled, and Jeff filed for divorce on February 24, 1982. even though, according to her family, Connie was again pregnant at this time. No evidence of a fetus was found with Connie's remains, but if you recall, when Jane Doe was found, she was wearing pants with a stretchy abdominal panel, maternity pants. If she was pregnant, it was still early enough in the pregnancy that no fetal bones had yet formed, or 1982 investigators didn't find them at the scene because they didn't know to look for them. 17 days after the divorce filing, on March 11, 1982, her daughter Misty's first birthday, Connie left Misty with one of her sisters and said she was leaving Wisconsin. Her sisters Diane and Shelley later spoke with WKOW. "I remember her saying goodbye," Shelley Christensen said. "When she left, we didn't know where she was going," said Diane McConnell. Connie sent her family back home letters telling about her travels, but eventually they stopped. Connie never came home to retrieve her daughter. The Christensens reported her missing when she didn't return home after years had passed. In 1993, Connie's photo ran in the local paper, the Wisconsin State Journal, with a little missing blurb describing her and saying she could be using the name Lorraine. The Christensens learned that Connie had been seen by a witness in Nashville, Tennessee in early April 1982. Lauren Ogden, the former deputy Wayne County coroner, told WMTV 15, quote, "We do know an eyewitness placed her in Nashville, Tennessee around the first part of April, but that's the last confirmation that we have of Connie's whereabouts," end quote. There is some indication that Connie got into legal trouble in Nashville relating to an incident of robbery or theft, but no more details are available. When the family learned of this, they thought perhaps she was afraid to come home because she'd gotten in trouble, and there was a possibility that she had just decided to stay away and restart her life elsewhere. In 1993, the family was interviewed by WKOW for the 10th anniversary of Connie going missing. This is from their coverage, quote, "When 27 News interviewed Christensen's sisters, Shelley Christensen and Diane McConnell, in 1993, a decade after her disappearance, the question of where Christensen could be was the focus. I think some of the siblings believed that she was out there and for whatever reason didn't want to be found," Shelley said. The sisters told Fox 47 that they initially believed that Connie would show up again. She had run away in her youth and she had always come back and reconnected, Diane McConnell said. But when Wayne County Jane Doe was identified as Connie, they knew how wrong they had been. "We always expected her to come back because as far as we knew she was still alive," Diane explained to WKOW. This from Western Wayne News, quote, "Her family now believes she might have been trying to travel home via bus and arrived at the former bus station and diner at Indiana 1 and Interstate 70 in Cambridge City before her life suddenly ended nearby," end quote. Let me explain here that there used to be a Greyhound bus stop at a truck stop on I-70 quite near where Connie's remains were found. Note that the last time anyone saw Connie, in April 1982, aligns with the 1982 coroner's estimate that Jane Doe had been dead for about 8 months when she was found skeletonized in late December of that year. So if there was a missing persons report for Connie, why wasn't she identified earlier? The answer is she went missing from Wisconsin in 1982 and was found months later in Indiana. Back then, interstate communication was not as it is today. Wayne County investigators started with missing persons in Indiana and then expanded their search to travelers on I-70 in the area, but they didn't know to contact authorities in Wisconsin. In that day and age, missing persons bulletins had to be renewed every 6 months, and that just petered out in Wisconsin. Furthermore, when modern online missing persons databases were established, the Wisconsin authorities had not taken steps to enter Connie into those databases. Let's talk about the impact the murder of Connie Christensen had on her family. Of course, her parents and siblings were saddened that she had vanished, but they were also a little bit hurt at the perceived rejection. Although they felt something could have happened to Connie, remember she had left and had not said where she was going or when she'd be back. There was a real possibility in the minds of the family that she had stayed away voluntarily. And there was one person very significantly impacted by this possibility, her daughter, Misty. News 3 Now did an interview with Misty. She told them, "I just grew up not knowing anything about my mom." Misty said she always assumed her mother had abandoned her when she went missing. "I was always like, did I do something? Like, why would my mom choose to leave?" Misty said. She said the Christensen family didn't talk much about Connie because everyone was kind of hurt that she'd left. So Misty grew up not hearing stories about her mom or getting to see her personal items and mementos. That was about to change. Misty lived with her husband Dan and their 3 sons in Michigan, but after Connie was identified, she traveled to Wayne County to meet with the people who had identified her mom. In early December 2023, Misty visited the tree where Connie was found and laid some flowers there. And during this visit, she wore on a necklace the gold, diamond, and opal ring her mom had been found wearing. She, too, had always loved opals. On the same necklace, she also wore a pendant containing a small amount of her mother's cremains. The family dug up all Connie's old photos and drawings she had made for Misty to peruse. She was delighted to learn that her mom loved cats and often drew them because she herself was an animal person as well. Misty told News 5 Nashville, quote, "Even just knowing what happened to her, I feel like has helped, although in some ways, it's also made it worse," end quote. She said to News 3 Now, "It definitely has kind of, I guess, made me feel relieved in some way to know that she didn't just choose to be gone. But at the same time, I'm also angry because somebody took my chance to know her away from me," end quote. Misty says one thing she would really like answers to is what her mom was doing in Nashville and why she went there in the first place. "I do feel like that would at least bring me some peace," she said to the News 5 station there. The Christensen family made arrangements for a memorial service for Connie and for her cremains to be buried in the B-Town Cemetery under a headstone engraved with her name, date of birth, and the date on which she was found. The ceremony took place on April 15, 2024, the day before Connie's birthday. Then Wayne County coroners Fouché and Ogden attended. Her sister Diane told WKOW, quote, "We buried some of her ashes where both our parents and her younger brother are. And then we also planted an apple tree the following day here on our property in her honor, on what would have been her birthday." Shelley said, "The apple tree is a big thing for us. She would sit up in the apple tree eating apples with a salt shaker." The sisters had lots of regrets at how things had turned out. Diane told WKOW, quote, "We missed out on so much of her life. She never got to know all her nieces and nephews and daughter," end quote. Even though the investigators received confirmation that Wayne County Jane Doe was Connie Christensen in November of 2022, they didn't release that information to the public as they began investigating her homicide. As we all know, in murdered John and Jane Doe cases, the homicide investigation is often stalled until the identity of the Doe is established. This is because in the vast majority of cases, the victim was killed by someone he or she knew. And that seems to have been the case here, or at least that is the working theory of investigators. They have identified a person of interest. Police learned about an older man who had lived near the Christensens in Wisconsin and was friendly with Connie's family. Connie's sisters still had photos of a 16-year-old Connie with this man who was 14 years her senior. It sounds to me as though this older man groomed and seduced Connie when she was just a teenager, as police reports say that by 1982, this man was Connie's boyfriend. When Connie left town, leaving baby Misty behind, she left with him. He worked for a traveling carnival, and Connie traveled around with him for some time and then disappeared. This person of interest, whom I would say is actually a suspect, has not been named publicly by authorities. But I learned his name was Larry M., and he had a significant history of violent crime, including crimes against women. Now, in 2023, Larry was in his mid-70s when the Illinois State Police tracked him down. On April 26, 2023, 2 Illinois state troopers drove up to Larry's home in El Dorado, Illinois. A woman answered the door, and they asked to speak with Larry. They were told he was asleep, but they asked her to inquire whether he would come to the door. 30 seconds later, he appeared at the door and agreed to speak with the troopers. They told him they were there to speak with him about Connie Christensen. They did not tell him she was a murder victim. Larry's various responses were clearly intended to shift the blame away from him. He said, "I haven't seen her in 30 or 40 years. Her sister accused me of killing her." Then he said, "I called her when I was in Wisconsin and she came to visit me for a few days. We talked about getting back together. Then she left to be with her ex-boyfriend." Of course, the investigators asked Larry who Connie's ex-boyfriend was and what he looked like. Larry responded that he didn't know the guy's name nor what he looked like. He thought the guy had been killed in a gunfight with police in Wisconsin or Minnesota, and that there was a photo of Connie robbing a bank. Notice he was making it seem that Connie was with someone dangerous, someone other than him. Then they asked Larry what Connie was wearing when he last saw her. He said it was winter and she was probably wearing a coat. Connie was found wearing a blue nylon jacket. The troopers asked Larry to come to the Saline County Sheriff's Office for a formal interview. He refused. He said, "I know how this works. I won't come back." As they left, he said, "You better talk to me soon because the doctor says I have only 11 months. Apparently, one of the two Illinois state troopers who was involved in this exchange with Larry came away with a very bad feeling. He told Coroner Kevin Fouché that the hair on the back of his neck stood up as they spoke, and he was certain the man was expecting a visit from the police. Illinois state troopers knocked on Larry's door again on September 6, 2023. That's when they were informed by Larry's son-in-law that Larry had died of cancer 2 days earlier, taking answers to all of our questions to his grave. Even though he's dead, I am not giving Larry's full name. He has not been named by authorities because they haven't been able to establish his guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, as they put it. I was cautiously optimistic since the Indiana prosecutor's office refused to give me a statement about the case, that they were actively working to connect Larry to Connie's murder. But Kevin Fouché told me that they have exhausted every avenue of investigation. They even tried more than once to extract trace DNA from Connie's clothing in hopes that they could tie it back to Larry. It didn't work. They have correspondence from Larry back in 1982 placing him with Connie, but that is not proof that he killed her. They don't know why or how she ended up dead in Wayne County, Indiana, where she had no ties, and neither did Larry, to anyone's knowledge. They surmise that Connie was traveling through the area with Larry on the way back to Wisconsin, but that is hardly proof that he murdered her. Larry had a violent criminal history, but we don't know for sure that Connie's blood is on his hands. In short, the Wayne County authorities are reasonably certain that Larry killed Connie, but they can't prove it. Connie's case is unfortunately one of those cold cases that finally ran out of time. There is no statute of limitations on murder, of course, but human suspects are mortal, and they pass on, as happened here. We will have to take comfort in knowing that at least Connie has her name back and her family has her back. Thank you to Kevin Fouché for taking the time to speak with me about this case, even though he is no longer the Wayne County coroner. It is thanks to his persistence and dedication that Connie was finally identified. Recently, I let listeners know about a new benefit available to them called an AbJack Insider subscription that's available through Apple Podcasts. An AbJack Insider subscription will give listeners ad-free access to every bit of DNA ID content published, both past episodes and future episodes. It will also give you benefits like early access and bonus content. Head over to Apple Podcasts and click on the DNA ID show page or the AbJack Entertainment channel to start a free trial. Thanks for listening to this episode of DNA ID. If you'd like to listen to the show ad-free and help support the show in the process, please head over to patreon.com/DNAID. And if you're interested in some fun DNA ID merch, visit the store at customizedgirl.com/s/DNAID podcast. To contact the show, please email us at dnaidpodcast@gmail.com. Follow us on social media at DNAID Podcast on Instagram, at DNAID Podcast on Twitter, or on Facebook at facebook.com/DNAID Podcast. Finally, if you want to visit our website, go to DNAIDpodcast.com. You'll be able to get all the episodes of the show, leave comments on episodes that I can respond to, and you can even leave voicemails. You'll get all the latest news about the show and important updates. Find links to our social media, merch, and a lot more. It's really your one-stop shop for everything DNA ID. DNA ID is written, researched, and hosted by me, Jessica Betancourt. It's produced by me and Mike Morford of AbJack Entertainment. Music by Connor Betancourt. Check out our other collaborative podcasts, Scene of the Crime, Missing Persons, and Beyond Bizarre True Crime.